Imagine waking up one day and realizing that intelligence no longer means what it used to. That somewhere along the way, cleverness was replaced with convenience, wisdom with virality, and depth with dopamine. You scroll through your feed and it feels like a carnival of noise. Millions of voices speaking, yet none truly saying anything. Opinions flicker across the screen like sparks from a dying fire, each one bright for a second before being replaced by another. It feels like the world is thinking less, feeling less, and being less. And yet everyone believes they're more connected, more informed, more aware than ever. But are we? Or have we mistaken the glow of our screens for the light of understanding? Once intelligence meant struggle. It was forged in silence, born from contemplation, curiosity, and a willingness to face uncertainty. Now it's simulated by algorithms that feed us answers before we've even asked the question. You might sense it sometimes, the hollowness behind our endless scrolling. The shallow arguments that masquerade as ideas, the desperate need to be right rather than seek truth. It's strange, isn't it? We built machines to think faster, to help us learn more efficiently, yet we seem to be forgetting how to think at all. How did we get here, into this paradox where knowledge is infinite, but wisdom has evaporated? Consider the child growing up today. Their first lessons come not from parents or books, but from glowing rectangles. Their reality is mediated through filters, their sense of self sculpted by hearts, likes, and followers. They speak the language of trends before they learn the language of thought. Their curiosity is outsourced to search engines, and their imagination is replaced by content recommendation systems that decide what they should dream about next. We call this progress. But is it? Once stories were passed down through generations, carrying the weight of survival, morality, identity. Now stories are replaced by snippets and content. The sacred act of storytelling has been commodified into seconds-long bursts of entertainment designed not to enlighten, but to addict. The mind adapts to this new rhythm, learning to skim, to react, to consume without digestion. And so a terrifying question emerges. What happens when a generation stops thinking deeply? Not because it lacks intelligence, but because it's never been taught to endure the discomfort that thinking requires. Because it's been trained to equate knowledge with speed, and truth with whatever gets the most attention. You may have noticed it already, in conversations that loop endlessly around cliches, in opinions shaped more by emotional contagion than reasoning, in the fear people have of silence, as if quiet itself were an enemy. When was the last time you sat still and thought, really thought, without reaching for a distraction? Somewhere along the line, we made a silent trade. Our capacity for reflection in exchange for stimulation. It wasn't forced upon us. It was sold to us, packaged in sleek devices and infinite feeds promising connection, freedom, and information. We became addicted to the illusion of knowing, mistaking exposure for understanding. And perhaps the cruelest irony is this: we are the most informed species in history, and yet, somehow the least capable of distinguishing truth from noise. Look around. The signs are everywhere. A generation drowning in data yet starving for meaning. A culture obsessed with intelligence tests and performance metrics, yet unable to recognize emotional or moral decay. Children who can navigate digital landscapes fluently, but cannot navigate their own minds. Adults who debate endlessly about politics, identity, and justice, but who have lost the patience for nuance. What does it mean to be smart in a world like this? Is it the ability to recall information, to follow trends, to speak in fragments that sound profound but carry no substance? Or is true intelligence something deeper, something quieter, that we have systematically unlearned? Perhaps we've confused intelligence with imitation. We've mistaken cleverness for wisdom, reaction for reflection, and speed for depth. We've raised a generation that knows how to appear intelligent, but not how to be intelligent. And the tragedy isn't merely that we are becoming stupid, it's that we no longer recognize it as a tragedy. We call it normal. We call it culture. But beneath this numb acceptance lies an unease, a whisper that something essential is slipping away. You can feel it when you talk to someone who can no longer hold a thought for more than a few seconds, when conversation collapses into slogans, when curiosity feels foreign and silence feels unbearable. This isn't just about technology or education. It is about something much deeper, something spiritual, psychological, perhaps even existential. Because if thinking is what makes us human, then what happens when we forget how to think? What happens when an entire generation confuses information with insight and attention with awareness? The world still spins, the screens still glow, and the noise keeps rising. But beneath it all, something ancient is dying. Something sacred. And perhaps the real question isn't how we ended up raising the stupidest generation. It's whether we still have the courage and the will to awaken from it. Somewhere in the hidden chambers of modern life, beneath the noise of progress and the glow of screens, lies a quiet psychological decay, a sickness so subtle we mistake it for normality. It is not stupidity born of ignorance, but stupidity born of comfort, the kind that sedates rather than shocks, that whispers "you're informed enough," and replaces the hunger for truth with the satisfaction of illusion. Carl Jung once wrote that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. The same principle applies here. We built a world designed to protect us from the discomfort of thinking. Thinking deeply hurts. It disorients, destabilizes, and forces confrontation with chaos. Yet every great mind in history understood that the path to wisdom begins in that very chaos. Nietzsche called it the abyss, but our civilization, terrified of silence and suffering, paved over the abyss with entertainment. This is the root of the modern disease. We have replaced the difficult pursuit of meaning with the easy consumption of distraction. Children no longer daydream. Adults no longer reflect. The collective psyche, once stretched by questions of purpose and morality, now contracts around the next notification. The digital world, our proudest creation, has become an amplifier of our most primitive instincts. It rewards outrage, vanity, and impulsivity, while punishing nuance, patience, and humility. The human mind, evolved for contemplation, is now trained for reaction. And so, the very organ that once lifted us above instinct, the mind, is being rewired to serve it again. Arthur Schopenhauer warned that intellect is invisible to the man who has none. That is the dark genius of this new order. It doesn't destroy intelligence. It makes intelligence irrelevant. We have constructed a society that values visibility over virtue, expression over understanding. The modern self is a performance, carefully curated, endlessly compared, and perpetually restless. When everyone is performing intelligence, no one is actually seeking it. The philosophers of the past wrestled with gods, morality, and the terror of meaninglessness. We instead wrestle with algorithms that decide what we see, think, and feel. The difference is profound. They fought to become conscious of their condition. We outsource our consciousness to systems that profit from our passivity. Jean-Paul Sartre might have called this the ultimate bad faith, the denial of our own freedom to choose how we perceive reality. He said that humans are condemned to be free, meaning that consciousness carries an unbearable responsibility. But what happens when we create technologies that relieve us of that burden? When we no longer need to choose, to decide, to interpret, because everything is interpreted for us, we become free from freedom itself. The hidden psychological problem is not ignorance, it's avoidance. We avoid the weight of thought, the pain of uncertainty, the humility of not knowing. And the more we avoid, the weaker we become. The intellect, like a muscle, atrophies when unchallenged. The spirit withers when fed only comfort. Aldous Huxley foresaw this in Brave New World, a society not enslaved by pain, but sedated by pleasure. His nightmare wasn't one of oppression, but of voluntary submission. Humans so satisfied, so distracted, that they no longer cared to think. And unlike Orwell's dystopia, where truth was forcibly silenced, Huxley's world silenced itself, through laughter, through indulgence, through endless entertainment. Look around, and you'll see Huxley's prophecy fulfilled, not in government tyranny, but in our collective psychology. We are the first species to drown in abundance. The philosopher Byung-Chul Han calls this the burnout society, an age where individuals exploit themselves in the name of productivity and self-expression. We no longer need external oppressors. We internalize the pressure to perform. Every moment must be posted, measured, validated. Even leisure is commodified. The soul becomes a brand. But what does this do to the psyche? When you're constantly performing for an invisible audience, you lose contact with your inner life. Reflection becomes anxiety, and solitude feels like death. You begin to measure your worth not by truth, but by traction. You learn to mimic intelligence, to quote, to post, to react, but not to understand. Viktor Frankl, who found meaning amid the horror of concentration camps, argued that the primary drive of human life is not pleasure or power, but meaning. Yet meaning requires suffering, an encounter with the parts of life that cannot be optimized or simplified. Our age has anesthetized itself from that confrontation. We have become allergic to difficulty, to boredom, to introspection, the very states in which meaning grows. We do not raise fools by denying them access to knowledge. We raise fools by denying them the endurance of thought. Education systems reinforce this illusion. Schools teach students what to think, not how to think. They prepare them to conform to patterns, not to question them. The curriculum rewards memory, not creativity. Obedience, not originality. The result? Generations capable of reciting information, yet incapable of synthesizing it. Minds that can pass tests but not face truth. This is not an accident. It is the logical outcome of a society that worships efficiency and despises mystery. Philosophical depth has no market value. Curiosity is unprofitable. So a population that questions everything is inconvenient to control, and so the culture shifts subtly toward the shallow, the digestible, the monetizable. What we call progress is, in many ways, the perfect psychological trap, the comfort of infinite stimulation disguising the starvation of the soul. The philosophers saw this coming long before the screens arrived. Nietzsche warned that modernity would produce the last man, a creature who seeks only comfort, avoids all risk, and replaces greatness with mediocrity. We have invented happiness, the last man says, blinking in the dim light of his own complacency. The last man doesn't need to be coerced into stupidity. He chooses it because thinking hurts, and yet within this despair lies the faint echo of possibility, because every illness carries within it the seed of its cure. The same mind that has been sedated by convenience can awaken again through discomfort. The same society that has surrendered to noise can rediscover silence as sacred. But that awakening cannot come from outside. It begins within the individual, when one person decides to stop scrolling, to stop performing, to stop running from the abyss and instead stare into it, to rediscover what it means to think not because it's easy, but because it's human. The sickness is deep, yes, but so is the potential for healing. And the first step is to see clearly the invisible machinery that dulls our minds and numbs our souls. Only then can we begin to ask the next question. If this is the disease of our time, what are its hidden consequences? The quiet ways it shapes our lives, our identities, our future. You don't notice the decay at first. It doesn't arrive with a bang. It seeps in quietly like water through the cracks of a house you didn't realize was rotting. It starts in the smallest moments, a conversation that feels strangely empty, an inability to focus on a page for more than a minute, a vague dissatisfaction that no amount of scrolling can cure. This is how the unseen consequences take root, not through catastrophe, but through corrosion. A society that forgets how to think does not collapse overnight. It dissolves gradually, its meaning eroded grain by grain. Consider how this plays out in the mind. Neuroscientists have long known that the brain adapts to the environment it inhabits. What we repeatedly do, we become. In a world governed by immediacy, our neural circuits are sculpted by interruption. The dopamine system, once an elegant mechanism for learning and motivation, has been hijacked by endless stimuli designed to keep us clicking, watching, reacting. The result? A generation trained for stimulation without satisfaction. You might call it the paradox of modern intelligence. Our minds are faster, but shallower. Our memory larger, but our attention shorter. We consume more information in a day than our ancestors did in a lifetime, yet feel emptier than ever. The mind, once an explorer, has become a collector of trivia. This constant stimulation fractures the self. We are always connected, but rarely present. Our thoughts scatter across timelines and tabs. Our identities fragmented into digital avatars. The self is no longer experienced as a unified consciousness, but as a collage, assembled and disassembled according to the needs of the moment. And what is lost in this fragmentation is the very foundation of wisdom. Continuity. Wisdom grows from sustained attention, from the slow digestion of ideas and experiences that shape one's character. But how can we cultivate wisdom in a world that never stops shouting? The tragedy is not that we have become stupid in the intellectual sense, but that we have become emotionally and spiritually malnourished. We feel less not because we care less, but because we are constantly overwhelmed. Empathy requires presence and presence requires stillness, but our lives are designed to prevent both. So we develop what psychologists call emotional flattening. The peaks of joy and the depths of sorrow give way to a dull hum of stimulation, a numbing equilibrium. Nothing shocks us anymore, because everything is a spectacle. We witness war and suffering as easily as we watch comedy sketches. The algorithm treats both as content. The consequence of this is terrifying, the death of empathy through overexposure. We scroll past human agony and forget it within seconds. We share it, react to it, and move on, believing that our awareness is equivalent to action. But awareness without embodiment is just noise. We mistake feeling something for doing something. And so, the machinery of the world hums on. The unseen consequences extend far beyond individual minds. They reshape entire civilizations. When a population stops thinking critically, it becomes easy to manipulate. Political systems, media networks, and corporations thrive on predictability. They do not need citizens capable of reflection. They need consumers addicted to novelty. In a society where attention is the currency, your consciousness is the product. This isn't conspiracy, it's commerce. The philosopher Guy Debord described this in The Society of the Spectacle, a world where all that was once lived becomes mere representation. Reality itself is mediated through images designed for consumption. The citizen becomes a spectator. The thinker becomes a customer. Truth becomes whatever trend dominates the screen. And when truth becomes fluid, morality follows. Without an anchor of shared understanding, we drift into what Nietzsche foresaw as the age of nihilism, an era where values collapse under the weight of relativism. When every opinion is valid, none are meaningful. When every narrative is equal, the concept of truth disintegrates. People, desperate for certainty, retreat into echo chambers where their beliefs are never challenged. Dialogue becomes warfare. Debate becomes performance. The collective intelligence of society implodes under the pressure of self-confirmation. And thus, the stupidest generation is not defined by a lack of IQ, but by the extinction of humility. We no longer listen to understand. We listen to reply. We no longer read to expand the mind. We read to reinforce it. Each of us becomes both prisoner and warden of our own ideological cage. This cognitive imprisonment manifests in subtle ways. The student who cannot tolerate boredom long enough to finish a book. The parent who feels closer to a stranger online than to their own child. The worker who measures worth in productivity, metrics rather than purpose. The citizen who replaces civic engagement with outrage hashtags. This is not stupidity. In the traditional sense, it is disconnection. The erosion of depth in all dimensions, intellectual, emotional, spiritual. Even love is not spared. Romantic connection has become transactional, optimized, gamified. Swipes replace stories. Compatibility becomes a matter of data points, not destiny. The sacred becomes statistical. The art of loving, once a lifelong apprenticeship in patience and vulnerability, is now just another algorithmic simulation. And what happens to a soul that never lingers? When every moment must be captured, shared, and validated, life becomes performance. Experience loses its texture. Memory loses its meaning. We live in what psychologists call present. Shock are continuous now, where the past dissolves and the future never arrives. This psychological flattening leads to an existential emptiness, what Viktor Frankl described as the existential vacuum. Without purpose, humans turn to distraction as a substitute. But distraction is a poor anesthetic. It numbs without healing. The result is a quiet despair masked by perpetual activity. The irony is almost poetic. We created a world where everyone has a voice, and in doing so, silenced the capacity for thought. The noise isn't just external, it's inside us. A restless hum of half-formed thoughts, half-felt emotions, half-lived lives. We were meant to evolve into beings of greater awareness, yet we've devolved into algorithms with pulse rates. The unseen consequences are not waiting for us in the future. They are here. Now in the empty stares behind glowing screens, in the exhaustion that no amount of rest can fix, in the pervasive sense that something precious has been lost, but we can't quite name what it is. And perhaps that's the most dangerous part. When stupidity becomes so normalized that it no longer feels like stupidity. When mediocrity feels like comfort. When silence feels unbearable. That is how civilizations die. Not through war or famine, but through the quiet collapse of meaning. Yet even here, amid the ruins of attention and the ashes of thought, something stirs. A faint, stubborn instinct that remembers what it means to be awake. A whisper that says, there must be more than this, and there is. But to find it, we must rebel. Not against machines, but against the part of ourselves that chose ease over understanding. The rebellion begins in the mind. Rebellion does not always begin with fire. Sometimes it begins in silence. Imagine this: one morning you decide not to reach for your phone. The room feels heavier, the air thicker. The stillness uncomfortable, almost hostile. Your mind begins to itch for stimulation, to check, to scroll, to see what you're missing. But if you resist, if you endure the silence for long enough, something extraordinary begins to happen. You start to feel yourself again, that twitch of anxiety when there is nothing to distract you. That is your consciousness reawakening from sedation. It is the soul's way of remembering that thinking is not a burden. It's your birthright. Rebellion, in an age of noise, begins with the radical act of attention. To pay attention to anything deeply is a subversive act. The world thrives on your distraction. Your awareness is its greatest existence. But let us not romanticize this awakening. To break free is not simply to turn off the phone or delete the app. The machine does not live in your devices. It lives in your habits, in your fears, in the reflex that equates stillness with failure. The first rebellion, then, is against your own mind. Friedrich Nietzsche spoke of the Übermensch, the higher self that emerges when one dares to go beyond comfort and conformity. But to transcend, one must first die to who they were. The mind that seeks ease must be dismantled. The self that craves validation must be stripped bare. It is no small task to undo years of conditioning that taught you to measure your worth in attention, to conflate knowledge with data, to fear being alone. But this undoing is the price of liberation. When you reclaim your attention, you reclaim your agency. The philosopher Simone Weil called attention the rarest and purest form of generosity. It is also the purest form of rebellion. Because in a culture built on distraction, the simple act of truly seeing your thoughts, your world, another human being is revolutionary. This rebellion does not demand violence or anger. It demands clarity. To see how the system profits from your confusion. To see how education trains compliance rather than creativity. To see how you have mistaken busyness for purpose, and once you see, you cannot unsee. The modern world conditions you to believe that freedom means choice, the ability to select between infinite options. But real freedom, as Viktor Frankl understood, is not the ability to choose endlessly. It is the ability to choose meaningfully. Every time you pause before reacting, every time you question before believing, every time you feel rather than flee, that is meaning reclaimed. Rebellion, then, is not a battle against technology. It is a reclamation of consciousness from automation. There's a story of a Zen monk who, when asked how he found enlightenment, replied, "When I walk, I walk. When I eat, I eat. When I sleep, I sleep." The simplicity of his words conceals a profound truth. The awakened mind is not distracted. It is present. In presence, the spell of stupidity breaks. The fog of noise lifts. You begin to see how the so-called stupid generation is not inherently stupid. It is merely sedated. Beneath the layers of distraction lies dormant intelligence, waiting to be remembered. To awaken it, we must rebuild the lost art of thinking. Thinking not as calculation, but as contemplation. Not as analysis, but as encounter. Not as consumption, but as creation. This kind of thinking requires solitude, the very condition we've been trained to fear. Solitude is where the false self dissolves, and the authentic self emerges. It is where ideas mature, where truth whispers. Sartre said, "If you're lonely when you're alone, you're in bad company." Solitude reveals that most of us have become strangers to ourselves. But to think deeply, you must first feel deeply. And that means making peace with discomfort. Our generation has pathologized every form of pain. Sadness becomes a disorder, anxiety a malfunction. But pain is not always pathology. It is information. It tells you where the wound is. It tells you what still matters. Nietzsche wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to give birth to a dancing star." That chaos is not your enemy. It is the raw material of transformation. To rebel is to stop numbing it. When you feel your despair, your boredom, your loneliness without trying to escape, it begins to transmute. It becomes awareness. It becomes energy. And then something miraculous happens. The same mind that once ran from silence begins to crave it. The same person who once sought validation in others begins to find it within. The noise outside loses its power because the signal inside grows stronger. You begin to see that intelligence is not accumulation, it is attention. It is not knowing everything, it is seeing clearly. And clarity, once found, demands courage, because to see the world as it is means confronting its absurdity, its contradictions, its cruelty. But it also means glimpsing its beauty with unbearable intensity. When the fog of distraction clears, even ordinary things become luminous. Sunlight through a window, the sound of rain, the face of someone you love. That is the hidden reward of rebellion, the return of wonder. Wonder, the purest form of intelligence, is what the machine cannot simulate. It is not reactive, not efficient, not profitable. It is the soul's recognition of mystery. And mystery, not mastery, is what makes us human. To raise the stupidest generation was to sever it from wonder. To heal it is to restore that sacred awe. So how do we begin? Not with manifestos or revolutions, but with choices. Small radical choices that shift the axis of attention. Read something difficult and stay with it. Sit in silence for 10 minutes each day. Have a conversation without checking your phone. Question what you believe and why you believe it. Let boredom be your teacher, not your enemy. These are not trivial acts. They are acts of recovery. Each one rewires the brain, strengthens the will, deepens the self. Each one is a quiet refusal to be programmed, and as more individuals awaken, something collective begins to shift. The network of consciousness starts to glow again, faint but real. Rebellion spreads not through outrage but through awareness. It begins in the mind of one who dares to ask, "What if I stopped running from myself?" And ends with a generation rediscovering what it means to be truly alive. Imagine this. One evening, long after the noise of the world has faded, you sit alone in a quiet room. The devices are off, the lights dim. For the first time in a long while, there is nothing left to distract you. Not a message, not a headline, not a glowing blue light calling you back into the trance of modern life. And in that silence, something strange happens. You begin to sense the faint pulse of your own awareness, the presence behind all the noise, the watcher behind the mind. You realize that it was never gone. It was only buried under layers of stimulation and fear. That awareness is you, not the persona you perform, not the opinions you defend, not the identity you curate, but the vast unnameable consciousness that has always been there, waiting. This is the ultimate truth the modern world hides. We are not our noise. We are not our thoughts, our achievements, or our failures. We are the awareness that observes them all. The stupidest generation was never stupid in essence. It was simply disconnected from itself. The true tragedy of our age is not that we have lost intelligence, but that we have lost presence. Intelligence without presence is mechanical. Presence without intelligence is instinct. Only together do they form wisdom. For centuries, philosophers and mystics have pointed to this realization in different languages. The Stoics called it logos. The Buddhists called it mindfulness. Jung called it individuation, the process of integrating the conscious and unconscious into wholeness. Each was describing the same revelation, that the outer chaos of the world mirrors the inner chaos of the mind, and that to change one, you must awaken the other. We ended up raising the stupidest generation not because we forgot how to teach facts, but because we forgot how to teach being. Modern life conditions us to think that consciousness is a byproduct of progress when in truth, progress is meaningless without consciousness. The more advanced our tools became, the more primitive our inner worlds remained. We learned to code but not to reflect, to connect but not to understand, and yet the human spirit, stubborn, timeless, resilient, refuses extinction. It waits beneath the layers of distraction like a seed buried under asphalt, waiting for a crack of light. The moment of awakening often begins as despair. The same emptiness that once felt unbearable becomes the doorway to truth. You start to realize that your longing for meaning was not a flaw, but a compass, that the ache itself was proof that something sacred still lives within you. Viktor Frankl understood this when he wrote, "Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how." The stupidest generation is not doomed. It is simply lost. It suffers not from lack of intelligence, but from lack of why. And yet here is the paradox: the very crisis that threatens to consume us can also awaken us. The algorithms, the noise, the despair, they are not the end. They are the test. They exist to push us to remember what cannot be digitized: consciousness, empathy, awareness, love. When you awaken, even slightly, you see the machine for what it is, not an enemy, but a mirror. Every click, every distraction, every escape is a reflection of your own unconscious craving. You no longer blame the world for your numbness. You see that the numbness was your refusal to feel. And in that seeing, something miraculous happens. The illusion collapses. This is the turning point, the moment you stop trying to escape the world's stupidity and begin to transcend it. Transcend does not mean to withdraw from life. It means to live awake within it, to walk through the marketplace with a silent mind, to scroll through the noise and see through its illusion, to love even those still trapped in their sleep, because you understand, you were once one of them. The rebellion matures into compassion. You begin to see intelligence everywhere, in the patterns of nature, in the silence between words, in the questions that have no answers. You no longer chase information. You listen. You no longer argue to win. You speak to understand. The ego begins to dissolve, and with it, the need to be seen, to be right, to be important. You discover that true intelligence is not about accumulation, it is about alignment. Alignment with truth, with being, with the pulse of existence itself. And this changes everything. You realize that wisdom was never hidden in books or algorithms, but in the stillness you were trained to fear. That the teachers you sought in universities or on screens were echoes of the one teacher who has always been with you, your own awareness. Once you touch that awareness, you understand why the world has gone mad. It has forgotten the sacred. It has mistaken simulation for soul. But you also see why this forgetting was necessary, because only through losing ourselves could we rediscover the magnitude of what we are. The stupidity of the age, then, is not a curse. It is a call. A cosmic alarm bell ringing through the emptiness asking, "Will you wake up?" And when you do, everything looks different. You see the beauty in imperfection, the holiness in suffering, the intelligence in silence. You stop rushing to fix life and start participating in its mystery. You begin to notice how every breath, every heartbeat, every passing moment contains the infinite. You no longer chase meaning, you create it. The final realization, the one that shatters everything and rebuilds it anew, is this: we did not raise the stupidest generation. We revealed the cost of forgetting consciousness. And now, at the edge of that forgetting, we have the chance to awaken, not just individually, but collectively, because awakening spreads. One aware mind awakens another. One quiet act of attention ripples outward, breaking the spell of distraction. One human being, fully alive, becomes proof that it is still possible to live wisely in a world gone mad. And perhaps in some strange and poetic way, this was always the plan. Perhaps humanity had to descend into the noise to rediscover the silence. Perhaps we had to drown in data to remember the value of wisdom. Perhaps we had to forget to truly know. When you reach this understanding, you see that intelligence was never about cleverness or memory or logic. It was always about awareness, the capacity to see what is real. And so the path forward is not a return to the past, nor an escape into the future. It is a remembering, a quiet, sacred remembering of what it means to be fully human, to feel deeply, to think freely, to love fiercely. That is how we heal this generation, Not by condemning it, but by awakening within it. Not by turning away from the madness, but by walking through it with eyes open and heart unguarded. And maybe then, years from now, someone will look back and realize, this was never the age of stupidity. It was the age of awakening disguised as chaos. Because in the end, the light is not found by escaping the darkness, it is born from it, and the world, though dimmed, is still waiting for you to open your eyes.